Mr. Chairman, we do have quorum.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me, Nathan and Audrey? Okay. All right, very good. So bear with us. We're going to go through the formalities of this meeting and approving minutes, and then we'll just get to a brief update. So just bear with me. So we're going to call the order of the MAG 911 Study Committee. For those participating virtually, which we all are, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under the MAG's jurisdiction. Before we begin with roll call, I would like to welcome to the committee Dan O'Neill, Assistant Chief of Police with Tempe Police. Is Dan with us today? I can't see everybody's. I don't know if he's here.
He's not logged on, no.
Okay. All right. We'll begin with a roll call. Staff will conduct the roll call.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the 911 City Committee. When I call your name, if you could please let us know if you're attending for the record. Chief Dale Naningay.
Present.
Thank you. Dan Cotterman. Josh Wright.
Present.
Thank you. Chief Raymer. Chief Raymer. Michelle Potts.
Present.
Thank you. Stephanie Heinzelman.
Present.
Thank you. Brent Axine.
Present.
Thank you. Chief Rodriguez.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy Mills.
Present.
Thank you. Jesse Cooper. Jesse Cooper. Allie Edwards. Allie Edwards. Chief O'Neill, not here. Then our co-chairs, Kevin Phelps. Not on yet. And our co-chair, Chris Brady.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we do have quorum.
All right, thank you. Our next time is call the audience. Do we have any written comments received?
Mr. Chairman, we do not have any comments received for this item or any other item.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we just need to approve the minutes. So we're going to go to approval of the October 4th, 2023 MAG 911 Study Committee minutes. Does any member of the committee have any comments on the minutes? All right, I don't think we've received any comments. So is there a motion to approve the October 4th, 2023 MAG 911 Study Committee minutes?
So moved.
Thanks, Josh. Do I have a second?
Second, Tracy Mills.
Thanks, Tracy. So we have a motion and a second. I guess those participating in the meeting by voice vote, we need you to just turn your cameras on and unmute while we do this vote. And then you can go back to your secret lives. So all those in favor, please say, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right.
That work, Nathan? Did you see it? Any nays? All right, if you're on the committee, you didn't say nay, you said aye, right? That's how we'll do it, by acclamation. There you go. Does that work?
I'll go through real quickly, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, come on. Okay, go ahead.
Stephanie Heinzelman. How do you vote?
Aye.
I saw you. Okay, great. Thank you. Chief Raymer, I'm sorry. Michelle Potts.
Aye.
Thank you. Brent Axine.
I approve the minutes.
Great, thank you. And I think that is Robert Sanders.
Aye.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, everybody. All right, now what you came for. So we're gonna provide an update on the discussions that we've had with ADUA, just bring everybody up to speed. So is that you, Audrey? Are you gonna do that for us? Because don't tell me I'm going to do that.
Sure, I can.
I'll help you. We'll work together on this one. Go for it.
I can lead off on this.
Why don't you
So,
start?
we've had a number of productive discussions with ADOA. We did meet with them and express what we would like to see in terms of service level agreements, data center locations, our concerns about policy routing, and also discussion about completing the pause next gen rollout within the existing system. They've come back with some information and we've asked for a little clarification. So we're having ongoing discussions with them on those issues. It does look like the next gen rollout will take place and that we've made some significant progress in that area. And also discussions about keeping the existing system funding and operational through the end of any potential transition.
Yeah, Audrey, why don't you start there? Because I think that's an important one, right? The current system we're on,
Yes.
because there's been some very productive meetings, as I understand it, that they have committed to funding it, obviously, through the last transition, which most likely will be Phoenix Fire or PD, I can't remember which order. And then for 30 days following that switchover. Do I have that correct?
That is correct. So
Okay.
the system would be functional and answering calls until the last PSAP was cut over and some period after that in case there were any issues and to wind it down smoothly.
Okay, so that's probably the first one. So everybody knows that that's the commitment. They made it very clear. They understand that's their responsibility until we make the migration. Maybe let's break down the SLAs and kind of the response directly to any of those and from the vendors that they talked to.
So we had asked to cut some response times. They had talked to their vendors and there was some pushback on that. We still feel that those are reasonable asks and have asked them to do a little more research to compare that with similar metro areas.
Yeah, I think so. When they responded to us, they said, well, they went and looked at other state contracts across the country, and we asked them, well, that's good if you're talking about a broad, a state that's covering a very diverse geographic area that includes rural and urban. We suggested that, federal engineering had looked at this as it regards to urban areas, greater Houston area, the San Diego area. So we've asked them to go back and do a more relevant comparison as opposed to taking a particular state and looking at their negotiations with AT&T. We wanted to see what it looked like in an urban setting. So we're going to go back and look at that. Am I saying that accurately?
I think that's an accurate representation of where we're at.
Now, the good news is most of this is done from a data center. Most of this is pretty easy access. So we hope that we would never have to get close to these downtimes, although they've already had one occasion, and I guess we could talk a little bit more about that in Tucson, where it did exceed some of their timeframes. So we can talk about that here in a second. Okay, let's talk about data centers. Our request was to have all the data centers, all the backup data centers in Arizona. And their response, we have one, Phoenix. We asked for the second also be in Arizona, and their response, Audrey, was
that they didn't feel there was another data center in a geographically diverse location that met their requirements.
Yeah.
There was some discussion around Vegas, but I think the time frame for that would be extended.
Yeah, I think in the
So-
conversation, we kind of pushed them on this idea that, AT&T was like, well, that's gonna cost us a lot of money and the availability of the data center. Because it had to meet a certain security, was it like what they call it, tier 3, or was that the right
Yes.
term?
Yes, that's the correct term.
Yeah, so it had to meet a certain security. They didn't feel like there was more than one in the state of Arizona, which that should be concerning. We suggested that AT&T in the future, we get it that trying to make that transition before we would move over to the new system was probably unrealistic, but we wanted to make it some kind of language or commitment that AT&T would pursue or at least explore those options in the future. Because there's enough data centers going up around the country, well, in Arizona, that we think eventually there's a future opportunity where they could make that happen. But probably in the immediate short term, that's probably not realistic at this point. So, okay, so we did SLAs, we did data centers. I can never remember what it's called.
Policy routing.
Policy routing. Let's talk about that, because this is where this group can have some opportunity to work together. So let's talk about that.
We believe anyway, that it would be best to go forward as a group in defining some of these policy routing options. There have been some hiccups as other agencies come online and they go with like the default or the recommended call rollover time, and it starts impacting their neighboring agencies. The way the routing takes place in NextGen, if you have an agreement with a partnering agency, the calls are going to roll over more than you're used to, depending on those settings. And so we feel there needs to be some coordination in configuring that and making sure that everybody's aware of what's happening and that those settings are appropriate, in part so that we're not taking advantage of our neighbors' staffing when our own staffing is low, and also just not to surprise them or our residents by having calls transferred that we would not normally have transferred to another agency. So rather than doing this individually, we would really like to see this be a coordinated process so that we can have a smoother transition that is more equitable across the agencies. Did I summarize that correctly?
No, I think that's good. I think so. For this group, I think it would be important, and I suspect it needs to happen at a different level than the conversation we're at this level we're having now. But and I know it already exists. The decision trees and the backing, how different PSAPs serve as backups for other communities. But in this instance, because of the technology, it can happen. It gets set up in the system automatically, and so we need to decide how we are going to, as a group, handle before we go online with their system, is probably have a discussion, and maybe it reflects a lot of how things are done today, but it needs to be worked out in some level of detail. Who's backing up what those protocols are, how long do you hold that call at the originating PSAP before it rolls out to a backup, because that makes it sound. I know we do that today, but this system apparently does it very automatically. And so if we haven't taken time to make sure we all understand what that looks like, what those protocols are in Phoenix versus what they might be in Glendale versus Mesa versus any other city, because they could be different, but we'll hold that call longer at one particular PSAP before we would say, yes, now it needs to roll up to our backup city. So we need to, I think this would be a good conversation we need to kind of get some feedback from PSAPs about, you know, again, maybe it's formalizing what is already in place, but it is important based on the experience of other communities that have already gone through this conversion, that those protocols are well established before we make the switch. And so, and the good news is the higher volume communities on their schedule of when these would roll out are at the back end, so we can work into this. But I just throw that out. I don't know I don't know how to, I mean, I know that needs to happen at the PSAPs, but we need to have, there needs to be a conversation about that and begin to formalize those policies before we sign the agreements with the state. Does that sound right, Audrey?
I think that's exactly it. It's kind of a handshake right now, and the volumes will be different, and maybe some formalization. And I think Ms. Potts said that at one of the previous meetings is in order to prevent unexpected surprises.
Okay, so that's something on our to-do list to work on. In the state, obviously, they're fine with that. They said, you just tell us what you want to do. But it's important for us to tell the vendor what is the plan, so it doesn't get to set to some assumed default or something that both sides of that formula, that backing up, understand what's going to happen. And then there was a discussion that Tucson would eventually also like to work to be a backup to us, and they would like us to back them up from the MAG group. Is that right, Audrey? Did they mention, they brought that up also?
Yes, Tucson has brought that up to us, and also they brought it up at our last meeting. I think there are not many other agencies big enough to take the call volume from Tucson.
Yeah, so that's a future agenda item we'll have to work on. And then the other one that I put on the table, I may be missing something, others, but the one that I think is very important for everyone, regardless of whether you're still in the MAG 911 or not, is I asked them to come back with a very, I know where it is, transparent guideline or policy on funding, what the future funding is going to look like. MAG no longer has the number of communities that sit down together and work out their priorities and then send those over to the state. Theoretically, you could have 90 or 89, whatever the number is, PSAPs, 87 PSAPs each year, you know, pursuing funding from the state. My request was, give us the manual. Tell us what that how is the scoring made? How is the priorities made? Help us understand, take away the mystique of this funding process, this grant process, and make sure that is clear to us. I couldn't offer, I suggested that there was other agencies that we receive funding through the state that were all, whether it's Homeland Security dollars or whether it's state share revenues, HERF dollars, but they all have some formula that we're all aware of. And so we kind of can anticipate what that looks like. I'm not aware, and they didn't share that there was those specific kind of guidelines for the $18 million that's collected to support 911 each year. And 18 million is very short of what we need, but it probably makes it even more important to know exactly the formula, the process, the priorities that they have, so we all can understand how that funding takes place. So they owe us that. And I think they acknowledged that was something they needed to work on now. I think it's more critical than it ever was before. So, all right, Audrey, Nate, anything else? I want to open it up for questions and comments, but is there anything? I know we summarized a lot.
I think the only other thing we discussed, Chair, was the making sure that when systems are put on hosts, that they're geographically diverse from each other so that any one host can't affect a number of neighboring agencies.
Okay,
So some architectural coordination as well as the policy routing coordination.
and the follow-up is they said they need till January to come back to us with the items that are on the table. Or December, maybe it was December, I can't remember, it was January. We told them.
December.
December. We told them we would then be briefing our committee, Meg, the larger committee, in our meeting in January. So,
Correct.
okay, I hope that's not too discombobulated or confusing, but are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to share with us at this time?
This is Tracy Mills.
Yes, Tracy, go ahead.
I have a couple questions with regards to the data center locations being adamant that they're in Arizona. What was the reasoning behind that? I mean, wouldn't we want diversity in the event there's a major incident in Arizona? We would want to have that flexibility of another data center taking over in another state. I mean, maybe I missed that conversation, but why are we pressing for Arizona? And is that a showstopper if it's not?
No, it's not a showstopper. It's a practice that was recommended by our consultants. But to your point, it would be obviously, if it's still within the state, it would have to be on a separate grid and physically significantly separated. Unfortunately, so that's the point. So the point, and we recognize it's not a showstopper. We asked for that as a preference for future consideration, just so we know. I think it has to do with the response, knowing physically where these backups are and how they're managed. I think that's part of that. I think but the part of it is, unfortunately, the locations where they're backing up Phoenix feel like they're less secure, they feel like they're more at risk to natural disasters and other events based on recent history. So when they say, yeah, our data center's in Dallas, for some of us, that doesn't give us a lot of comfort. When they say our data center's in Los Angeles, that didn't help either. So that was probably what the impetuses were. We were very concerned that their backup data centers don't feel like they're in a better spot than having one in Phoenix or north central Arizona versus south. But to your point, you're right. We don't want them next to each other. So it's not just, it would be in the state, but it would still have to meet some other kind of criteria. So it's obviously can't be met right now. But with all the data centers going up all around Arizona, we think we're just asking to consider that into the future.
Okay. And then my other question is on the SLAs. You know, we're talking about these SLAs, but what are the SLAs? Do we have like a documented SLA from MR911?
Yeah. Oh, from MR911?
I mean, like, so we're comparing to something that I don't know that we necessarily have now.
No, we're not comparing to what we have now. We're
Okay.
comparing to best practices in other urban areas.
Okay.
So you're right. We were not comparing like, okay, today, maybe it's better, maybe it's the same, I don't know.
Yeah.
We were just suggesting that the problem is they kept comparing it to broad applications of what other states have. And we said, well, what we've been looking at is urban areas, greater Houston area, San Diego area. We were talking about what are those different than a contract that covers both a rural and a semi-suburban state. And that's the point we were making. And they were open to us if we could demonstrate that in these major metropolitan urban centers that they had different SLAs, then they would take that back to AT&T.
So is the concern more though for the SLAs in the rural areas because we don't have, maybe technicians nearby or they can't respond as fast or?
Well, I want to get past the idea that it doesn't necessarily mean that someone physically is going to drive to your location. They're probably going to be at a data center doing this.
Right.
But what it does mean, and Phoenix made this point very clear to them because they did have a failure in Tucson. So when a system goes down for any period of time, right, the difference of magnitude of calls that it impacts is materially different when it's a Phoenix versus a Prescott. If Prescott's down for 15 minutes, I don't know how many calls that is. Let's say it's a dozen. When it's 15 minutes in Phoenix, that could be hundreds, if not more. And the point is, when you're in that environment, we're expecting a different level. We're talking about a different level of response because of that.
Okay, understood. And then last on the policy routing, I guess I'm not sure how to ask this question, or if it is a question, or is this more of a PSAP manager discussion, or at a chief level?
Yes,
IGA?
not my level, not my, yes.
Right. I
I
mean,
think
like,
if
I'm
it,
not
yeah,
sure if that's something for this committee, I mean, it sounds like, I mean, routing, you can dictate the routing however you want it to route, but there has to be those agreements in place, right? To be able to handle or take over, if Peoria is going to take over surprises calls, if we're too busy, or whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
How is that a study committee?
I think this is where I learned to delegate.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm just asking
I'm
because
not- I'm not
I'm newer
gonna
to
do
this than you guys. So you guys.
Yeah, no. This is where we need to look to the PSAPs, because Tracy, the point was that the way the system is developed, that's one of the advantages of this technology. There's no, hey, calling someone and saying, hey, we got troubles, we need you to help back us up. The system, just whatever's built into those protocols, it just happens. And what's happened in a few cases where they flip the switch and turn it on, and without somebody spending a lot of time looking at what those defaults are on the protocols where the calls were rolling over, it started overwhelming the backups who weren't ready for it, and they needed to go and adjust, not only creating that relationship and defining a relationship, who's backing them up, but when does that backup take, or when does that call roll out, right? What are the conditions? It can be very different maybe for a larger PSAP than it may be for smaller PSAPs, but we've just heard enough comments and experiences where that's, as soon as that system is flipped on and it reaches, if someone doesn't really aware of, like, hey, in my city, we're going to hold that call for so long before it rolls out, and the other PSAP knows that. If they don't, at least there's been a few conditions where it's created some temporary challenges, and we're just wanting to say, hey, let's do that now. Let's have the conversation. Let's set up the agreements, and the state's fully supportive of this. And it's kind of lessons learned, and that's what we're trying to apply here.
Okay, so we're just kind of mapping out a recommendation for what that would look like, but each agency would have to sign off.
And maybe there's a way that within this group that's still remaining, we have that. This would be a good discussion for us to talk about how we help each other out.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great questions. Thank you. Who else? Okay. Really? It's that confusing. I know, it's really interesting. What do we, I don't think. So what's the next step, Nathan, Audrey? Are we just going to take this report, what we have here, and repeat it again in front of the management committee, or what's the thought where we go from here?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the study committee, obviously pending another conversation with ADOA in the coming weeks or month or so, we'll see the result of that, see how if it is worth having another one of these meetings, or simply can we do another memo update version for the benefit of the study committee members. We do not hold policy committee meetings in the month of December. So that means the next round of policy meetings is January, including management committee. So I think the ongoing work discussion with ADOA is near term, providing updates in memo form or meeting form to this group as needed. In the meantime, we can work with Liz Graber, closest to the PSAPs, and start having those conversations about call routing policies and start to kind of manage our way through that one. So I think that's on our to-do list for now, and I'll look to Audrey for any others.
No, I think that's pretty accurate. I think those ongoing discussions, reporting back to this group in some way and hopefully getting to the point of being able to bring something forward in January would be the goal. And, then obviously other issues to be resolved around governance and contracting and things like that as we move forward.
Yeah, okay, good. I would encourage, I think the conversation will follow up what you can do as an agency. I mean, the point is we've told ADUA, we're moving to that contract. We're just trying to see it, make sure it fits best and serves this group the best. And I think they've been certainly more open to that conversation recently than they have in the past. But I think if your PSAPs already understand those protocols for backup, I think I'd start at least having discussions to begin formalizing, what would that look like? How would we formalize those? I think that's you could start having that conversation pretty soon. Because I think I would, if I were any community, before I would make that switch, I'd make sure those were clearly understood from your PSAP as well as the one that's designated to or assigned to be your backup. Those would be, and they're probably pretty simple. It's just more of the formalization. We can work on some ideas a template of how to create that. But I think that would be a good conversation to have. Where I think I'm hopeful is that we're going to get to see more detail about the decision making for funding in the future, for future items after they've done all these conversions. What's left as far as the funding, and how does that, as far as replacements or someone's trying to do a new 911 center, all those things will be discussed. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you listening in. Hopefully it's been helpful, and I think we've had some good dialogues and opened up a better dialogue with the state than we've ever had. So we appreciate their efforts also. So if there's no other business of the committee, I guess we will adjourn this meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.